Hey everybody, Garrett from AppMap here with another runtime analysis deep dive. Today we're actually going to be going over 3 rules. I have the first one pulled up here. We're going over slow function call, slow HTTP request, and slow SQL query. What these rules basically are is, just as the definition kind of states, it ensures that these types of functions or these actions happen in a certain threshold or a certain time frame. The default for that is 1/4 of a second. Obviously, with a function call, it's going to be functions. For HTTP server requests, it's network requests, and for SQL queries, it's just that, SQL queries. We're going to talk a little bit about what happens, why these happen, and how we can kind of mitigate them. So first things first, I went ahead and pulled up an app map ahead of time just so we didn't have to sit here and wait for loading. But what I've done, for those who haven't used app map before, is once you create an app map, you can come in here to the app map extension here in VS Code, and that's what I'm using. This also works in IntelliJ. You look underneath the runtime analysis inside the findings table, and we are looking specifically for a performance finding slow function call. I'm just going to pick the first one, and what it did was it brought up this page, which then we were able to click on the map that we wanted to view, which happens to be this one. Now, it pulled up in the trace view, and as wonderful as that is, we have an awesome new feature and an awesome new tool called a flame graph. So if we take a look at our flame graph, we can see exactly how long these functions took to run. So first things first, the thing we want to be aware of is all of these little guys up here are function calls that are being run. And we can see the time. Not only does it display it in milliseconds, or if you look down at the bottom, it's highlighted in white with the number of seconds to make it easy. You can see how long the actual section took to run. And we have this main one called the instrumentation process, and then we have a really, really big one that should not be taking that long. So let's go take a look at it. We're going to click on that one and just see kind of what it's doing, and it'll expand for us. And I just want to make sure I'm on the right one. So I'm actually going to click. If you noticed, I clicked on that essentially associated finding, and that highlights it for me so I know exactly in my call stack kind of where it's at. So if we go take a look at this action controller render, and we kick out to it or open it up, we can see there's a few things here that are happening. And as we look at this specific example, if we look above it, these long running queries, and we take a look at their associated findings as well, these are just renders to HTML. These are taking data, plugging it into a view, and sending it back. So why are they taking that long? Let's go check it out. A lot of times you'll see things like this, where these slow function calls, slow HTTP server requests, or slow SQL queries are results of either poor code practices or poor code practice implementation. Sometimes they can be resource management. Some function or some thread is taking too many resources. Sometimes in the case of SQL queries or long-running SQL queries, we're not using caching. HTTP requests, we're not using caching, or we're not using a CDN to deliver content, pre-rendering it on the page before it comes down from the server. There's multiple different things that can happen within these to make them slow. But if we pull up the actual code here, we can see a do loop that basically calls this renders with render method and just loops through it as many times as we need to for each option. There would probably be a better way. There are other options down here, and we see these do loops as well, that allow us to take some of that data that we request from the backend and insert it into these renders that are higher up down the page, in our call stack. And as we look at them, we can see every single one of these is a partial. So whenever we call that render function, we're calling it for each individual partial. And if we take a look at one of these smaller ones, I'm just going to click there and close this out. We have an inline template render or a components layout render that took only a teeny tiny amount of time. So if we want to take a look at that, we can see the difference here. If we see the difference here, sure, it's calling a partial, but it's calling only one of them. So maybe there's a way that we could restructure, pull out some of those partials, look at different home views or different index views that we could take or use to be able to make sure that those calls, every time we have this render partial, we're not calling this massive function to try and render it again with all these loops. And I'm jumping around really quickly just to show you what's happening. But as we can see, these renders are what are slowing down this function call. Same thing is true with any sort of SQL query or anything like that. The way we mitigate that is updating our coding practices, maybe breaking some things out. Maybe we use caching. Maybe we pre-render some pages where they don't need data, or we do other things that allow us to get these pages and these renders down to the application a little bit quicker. I hope that was beneficial to you. Thank you for joining in, and we hope to see you next time. See you later.